Hi, it's Jodi Daniels, and I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and a certified informational privacy professional, and I help provide practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hi, Justin Daniels here. I am a cybersecurity subject matter expert and business attorney. I am the cyber quarterback, helping clients design and implement cyber plans as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches. Additionally, I provide cyber business consulting services to companies.
And this episode is brought to you by Red Clover Advisors. Red Clover Advisors helps companies comply with data privacy laws and establish customers' trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, SaaS, e-commerce, media agencies, professional services, and financial services. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there is greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more, visit redcloveradvisors.com or email info@redcloveradvisors.com.
All right, and today we're really excited to have Averdium Senior Vice President of Security and Compliance, Paul Caiazzo. He focuses on corporate development, technology alliances, and strategic initiatives, guiding Averdium clients through challenging security problems. Paul also leads Averdium's internal security and compliance initiatives and works to reduce risk across the organization and its customers. Paul has 23 years of experience with an extensive background in the federal government and financial sectors. And I'm also going to add that he is a successful entrepreneur as well, because he had his own business for many years before becoming part of Averdium. Paul, what's up?
Hey, Justin and Jodi, thanks. I'm delighted to be here today. I'm excited to talk.
Yeah, this will be fun. It'll be like the continuation of the fun that we had earlier. Was it really the spring? It feels like that was yesterday and really long ago all at the same time.
Yeah. Don't you remember that? That's when Jodi was in the closet doing her part of the webinar.
Yeah, I think I've upgraded now. I have a blank wall. I really was hiding in the closet. That was fun. That's the way to do. No, wait, you were in the closet. I was in the closet. Oh, a different one than we put you in the closet.
I was in a hotel room, so it all worked out. I haven't been in a hotel room in quite some time now for some strange reason, but those sessions were great. I thought we had a very lively conversation around incident response and the work from anywhere sort of paradigm. So.
Yeah, well, I think to get started, Justin, you kind of started on the, Paul as an entrepreneur yourself. And I think that would be really interesting is help us understand how you got to Averdium, but kind of rolling back to the company that you started and maybe even how you found your way to security overall.
Yeah, sure. Boy, that's a long story. I'll condense it. So as you noted in part of that introduction, Justin, I have about 23-ish years of experience in cybersecurity. I started really as a systems administrator, very technical, hands-on person. And I think having exposure to a really broad variety of technologies allowed me to become successful at security, because you have to sort of understand how things work together to really be able to secure them. I live in DC or the DC area, and I worked for some defense contractors on various different military bases here, supporting some missions for the Navy, for the Marine Corps, et cetera. And then moved to a different program that was supporting foreign military sales for a Northern African country. And they had a really significant counterterrorism initiative going on, because Al-Qaeda was really, I think, prolific in that country at the time. And so we were working on building out a network that basically supported a national 911 type system so that people could call in emergencies. And I was able to take the lead for all the security initiatives with respect to that, so implementing all the technologies, evaluating, selecting it, et cetera. And that single program really instilled in me sort of the self-belief that was required to go out and do my own thing. And that led me to start my company, TrueShield, in 2008. We did a lot of federal government contracting, a lot of financial institution contracting and consulting and things along those lines. ended up starting a managed security services program about 3 years in. So in 2011, we became MSSP, so we did 24/7 monitoring and threat detection and things like that, which is what sparked the interest of the private equity group that ultimately ended up purchasing TrueShield in 2018. That's Sunstone Partners, the company that bought my company, as well as the now 3 other companies that have been purchased and rolled into what became Averdium. So, I'm still around here because I'm super excited about what we're doing in Averdium, and I think we make a difference. And that's something which I've really held near and dear to my heart for a long time, is that cybersecurity, at the end of the day, you are making a difference, right? You help companies protect themselves, protect their customers. Similarly, Jodi, from your perspective with privacy, helping to build the trust of our customers' customers, so that they can operate securely and protect everybody. And that's sort of the key thing for me is, we strive to make a difference. So
I love it.
Well, Paul, on the Averdium front, would you like to talk a little bit more to educate our audience about the kind of services that Averdium provides, since it is the merger of 4 companies who provide a pretty vast array of different cybersecurity services?
Yeah, sure. So, we consider ourselves to be sort of a full scope cybersecurity company. We split the business into really kind of 2 practice verticals, one professional consulting services, and the other is managed security services. On the professional services side, we really focus on, compliance, risk governance, things like that. So a lot of PCI work. We're PCI QSA. We do quite a lot of HIPAA work, and high trust. We're a high trust certified assessing organization. So there's a lot of privacy impacts there as well. Quite a lot of various different bespoke offerings. When a customer's got some complex security problem they've got to try to solve, we can parachute in some really seasoned experts, as well as incident response falls under that practice as well. So when a company gets breached or has a major ransomware hit, which happens frighteningly often, our experts can help get a company through that. On the managed services side of the house, we're a 24/7 shop. We do threat detection and response using a variety of different technologies like a SIM or EDR tools. You probably are hearing my dog in the background, and I apologize for
dog
that.
to counter.
It's not on our property though, so there's not a threat. As we're talking about threat, we have a very sophisticated security system here called a loud dog.
Yeah, mine's a tiny little Westie, so I don't know that he's going to really scare anybody off, but he certainly thinks he's bigger than he is. So anyway, apologies for that. But yeah, within the MSSP space, quite a lot of endpoint detection and response, or managed detection and response, SIM-based monitoring and threat detection, vulnerability scanning, et cetera. So again, full scope cybersecurity shop. We try to do a lot for our customers.
So with all those different services and things up, and here's our dog. It's great. I just did a video yesterday, actually, about how we're not going to apologize for our dogs. This is a podcast, so everyone listening, just enjoy the dogs. They're part of the fun. Yeah. So, in all seriousness, though, thinking about how you started your company and where we are today, and now that you're a combination of other companies, and thinking about the threat landscape that exists, how have you seen the market evolve, and a little bit of where we came from and where we are, and then a little, crystal ball, like where you think we're going to be going? What do you see happening with the evolution in the next maybe 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, so, I tend to think that business problems don't change anywhere near as fast as technology does. I think people struggle with some of the same stuff, and will continue to struggle with a lot of the same stuff, mostly around information governance and threat detection, which is really the problems that we try to solve. But I think the strategies that companies take to try to overcome those challenges, they do tend to change as technology evolves. And a lot of what we've seen interest growing in, and really just a thirst and hunger for information about it, revolves around zero trust networking as a strategy to really help secure data assets, and also to assist with threat detection and response. Also, we've seen sort of the emergence of a category of tools called XDR, or extended detection and response. And there's been a huge amount of interest in that this year. So, traditionally people used things like a SIM that's focused on monitoring the network edge for threats that are coming inbound. But really, that doesn't work anymore, because the perimeter side sort of no longer exists. We're, working from home. Everybody's working from home. Data is no longer in a data center. It's in, one of many cloud providers and often in multiple cloud providers. So trying to maintain consistent data governance, information governance, and even identity governance across that diverse environment is a challenge. And I think that's where organizations are investing their time and effort and also their technology spend on solutions that will work well to provide secure connectivity, to provide that real manifestation of need to know and least privilege. And to me, that all boils down to zero trust. So I think in 2021 and beyond, you're going to see much more adoption of zero trust strategies. And to me, zero trust is not really a tool necessarily. It's more of a discipline or a philosophy of how do you ensure that, first off, the people that need to access a data resource are the right people. Contextually identify that human, and then give them access to only the things that they need in a dynamic manner, which supports a lot of the orchestration and automation that rapid response really requires. So that's where I think the market's going, and that's what our customers have been telling us. So I believe them.
So Paul, just for the benefit of our audience, you talked about zero trust being a change of philosophy. So if I'm a person in the C-suite and I'm not as familiar with a term like zero trust, for the benefit of our audience, explain the difference with the zero trust philosophy from what you might typically see now.
Yeah, sure. So I think traditionally, the sort of paradigm is that if a user is on your network, like physically located on your network, they are trusted sort of by default. Sort of a de facto trust is granted to that individual. And people outside the network are not trusted. So there are extra steps of authentication that are required, or there may be different levels of access that are granted to them because they're not on the network. So the idea behind zero trust is we want to treat all of those types of users the same. We don't trust any of them, whether they're on the network or not on the network. So location is not really a factor for whether or not you should trust a user. It all boils down to the identity context. So where is that user logging in from? Is the device that they're logging in secure? Has that user logged in at that particular time in the past? A wide variety of different things you can use to contextually identify the user, and then only grant them access to the stuff that they actually need. Now, the problem with that is that most organizations have not really gone through the comprehensive sort of workflow analysis and that data classification process that has to happen to support that. And that's one of the key barriers that has to be overcome for an organization to start drifting towards a zero trust model. But it really boils down to don't trust anybody until they've given you a reason to be trusted.
So what does that look like, the data classification piece and the work that has to get done? What does a company need to do to be able to get to that foundation that you just described?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it all boils down first off to, what sort of business are you in? You can get some good insight into the types of data that you're going to have depending upon what industry you're in. For instance, a financial institution is going to have a different type of data than a healthcare institution, but at the end of the day, probably needs to treat that data pretty similarly. So you really need to map your business processes. You're consuming data from your customers, you're consuming data from your third-party vendors, you're consuming data from your employees, and all of that is sensitive data in some way, shape, or form. There's also going to be intellectual property that an organization has that they're going to need to take care of, and for some organizations that might be the most important thing. If you're a heavy development shop that has some interesting new technology, or you're a startup, that IP is probably the most valuable thing in the network, and so you have to protect that. But I think the other thing about it, and this is what I always think is the most challenging component for our customers, is not just what data do you have, but where is it? Because I think very often people have sensitive files on their laptops, for instance, or in a Dropbox account or something like that, or in their email. And it can be difficult for an organization to map all that stuff out. There are some tools that assist with that, but it really boils down to understanding your business very well, the processes that your users use to interact with data and resources, and then ultimately how you're interacting with third parties like your customers or business partners.
Well, thank you. I think that's really helpful.
Sure.
Now I think we want to change gears just slightly, and I'm going to take over Jodi's role for a minute and
see how you do.
Yes. Well, now that Paul just taught me that if I text you in the house in a zero trust environment, you're not going to trust me whether I text you in the house, outside the house, in another country, anywhere.
I can ignore you.
Yes. Well, you do that well sometimes. Anyway, Paul, the question I had is what role do you think the increased privacy regulations, especially what we're seeing in California, will impact your business from a security standpoint?
Well, there's a couple of ways. Whenever I see new regulations, and this is really the business development side of me speaking here, but whenever a new regulation comes out, we view that as opportunities, right? Because a company is going to struggle trying to understand how to comply with a new set of regulations, and we generally can help with that sort of thing. So we view it as opportunity, but there's also a challenge there for us, right? Because if you think about what I described earlier around our MSSP services, our job is to monitor our customer networks, right? And so we're in the process of collecting a lot of, identifiable information. Right, geolocate a user. We're going to profile that user's behaviors. We're going to, track their email addresses and all those sorts of things, which could constitute PII in one way, shape, or form. So we have to be careful about how we protect that data. In the normal course of operations, we're not collecting things like social security numbers or PHI or things like that. But since we're capturing log data, and in some cases can do packet captures of networks, there exists a chance that we're going to collect something which is protected data or really needs to be protected. So we had to work pretty hard to, first off, build out the systems in a way that, we have that zero trust architecture built into our platform so that the only people that can access that type of data are the ones that need to be able to use it. So, users outside of our cyber ops centers of excellence, which are our security operations centers, they can't access any of that customer data at all. Only the analysts can. And that's really, I think part and parcel to doing the job correctly. But we've also had to prove, that we're able to do that. So, by going through the various third-party audits that we go through, which, fall down to me as our CISO, I think gives our customers some confidence that we know what we're doing, which we do. So that's a good thing. But it's been a challenge, simply because, just like anybody else, when a regulation changes, you have to react to it and preferably try to get in front of it by doing it correctly to begin with. But there's just so many different jurisdictions for privacy at this point that I think that's going to be the big challenge. Until there's a single national privacy standard, people are going to struggle to have to figure out which jurisdiction do I have to comply with.
So have you seen companies I'm not sure anyone loves regulation and signs up for it and says, this is great, but are you seeing companies being more willing to really review their security measures now because there's a regulation and because there's fines and penalties associated with it? Whereas before it was, well, I probably should, but maybe I won't. Are you seeing that or not so much? And are you seeing only the companies who have to deal with the California regulations? Or what about, we're in Georgia, maybe I'm a local company here and I really don't have California companies, I'm pretty regional. Am I paying attention to it because it might come, or I'm still ignoring it?
Well, so I think that anytime there's a thou shalt versus you should, then people tend to move more quickly in response to that sort of thing. So certainly the potential for fines and things like that have moved the needle for some of the customers that we talk to. I don't think I've seen too many organizations that really have no current potential exposure to CCPA really worry about it too much. So to your example, Jodi. However, if you're a Georgia-based e-commerce company, for instance, a very good chance you've got California citizen customers, and so therefore you do have something to worry about there. So I certainly think a lot more people are paying attention to security right now, but I would actually say in a lot of cases, that is more incident driven. And what I mean by that is you don't need to look, through too many Google search pages to find, really scary ransomware stories. And I think that's really driving a lot of people to take it more seriously than ever before. Again, from a business development standpoint, the business guy in me, when I see one of those reports, says, well, there's opportunity there. But the security guy in me, it sort of shakes his head because there was probably some fundamental, problem that should have been solved a long time ago that created that particular incident. And I always hate to see somebody have, that really bad day of being hit by a serious security incident.
So Paul, I want to kind of walk you through a scenario and we'll get to a question. So we talked about increased regulation, companies who get hit with ransomware, or my other favorite is phishing that leads to wire fraud. And then they realize, we need to have more security, but that's not the business that we're in. So we're going to go to a third-party provider like Averdium and have Averdium help us with our security. But now what happens is, as Averdium gets bigger and you have hundreds of clients and I'm the threat actor, I'm thinking, oh, I don't need to go after those. I'm going to go after the common point, which is the MSSP. And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your thoughts around what may keep you up at night, which is the security of the MSSP, who's helping with the security of all its customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that does keep me up at night. So, as I mentioned, I'm our CISO, and in effect, I view that as being the de facto CISO for all of our customers. And, the million plus devices that we're monitoring are effectively, they roll up to me for accountability. So it certainly does keep me up at night that potential impact to us could really compromise the security of our customers. Now, the way that we've architected our platforms really mitigates that risk down to basically zero, because there isn't the ability for a threat actor to jump from environment to environment. However, I do agree, as our profile grows, or as any service provider's profile grows, they become a bigger and bigger target. And I know that there are threat actors out there. APT10 is a great example. They focus specifically on service providers and have to great effect. And I actually worked an incident where they were the bad guys, compromised a managed services provider, not a managed security services provider, but more of a managed IT provider. And because their networks were not architected very well, they were able to compromise a large array of enterprise class companies that were customers of this MSP. So that happens pretty frequently. And given that those threat actors, they're there to find the quickest way to monetizing that illicit access. And so sure, if I can compromise one company and by proxy also compromise their dozens of customers or hundreds, certainly that's going to be an attractive proposition to a bad guy, and I guarantee you they're going after it. So we take it seriously. We not only have architected our systems to provide the defensive measures, but we use the same detection and response technologies to monitor ourselves as we use to monitor our customers. So the same threat intelligence, the same detection strategies, the same sort of rules that we use to monitor the customer networks, we're also using ourselves. Give ourselves some advanced warning. That also helps us curate additional threat intelligence, which we can provide to customers and also publish out to the market. So if you follow us on LinkedIn, you'll read some of our threat advisory reports. And yeah, it's a serious issue that, it's happened recently. In fact, I think there were some MSSPs recently that were attacked by, I think NetWalker, ransomware as a service threat actor, popped one of our competitors, which I'm not going to name. But that certainly opened my eyes.
Yeah, it's a big risk. So we talked a little bit about privacy and security and new regulations and how companies might be struggling with that. Where do you think companies are still struggling, just in general?
Yeah.
All these different threats that are out there. What are some of the top areas where they're struggling?
Yeah, there's a handful. And I think the threat detection is challenging. Being able to detect a sophisticated threat actor on a company's network is not an easy thing to do. And if a company's trying to do that themselves, chances are pretty good that they're not doing well at it. The tools that support that sort of motion are tricky to make work and to integrate well together. So that's, I think, one of the key things is just being able to detect the bad guys, and then actually responding to it when something does happen. The other big thing really, and I think one of the other two big things is information governance. Like I mentioned earlier, just knowing what data you've got, where it exists, and how to protect it and secure it in a manner that actually works for the business. That's a big challenge. And I think the third and last one I'll mention is really just the users themselves. Users still, unfortunately, security awareness is just not as high as it needs to be. People get phished all the time, day in and day out, and that I think is not going to change. You can try to implement all sorts of email gateways and things like that, but just one good phishing email lands in the wrong inbox, person clicks it and either pays the fraudulent wire, to your point, Justin, or downloads some malware, which because the network is very open and flat, creates a really significant propagation event where malware gets dispersed throughout the network very, very quickly through that simple one phishing attack. So that, I think, is something to keep focused on, and it's not going to taper off.
I love the comment about data. I mean, I feel like that's what I do all day. People will come and they'll ask for, privacy notice or something. And I said, well, but we have to go back to the data. So the single point of truth is always understanding the data that you have and what you're collecting. And on my side, I'm always about, well, what are you doing with it, and who are you sharing it with, and how are you using it? And then on the security side, we need to know where it's being stored in all those different places, just like you described.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, sorry, Justin, this speaks back to the ransomware situation, and I'll just real quick on this. So ransomware threat actors now are moving towards double extortion, which you probably have heard of, but for the sake of the audience, this is where the ransomware threat actor not only encrypts the systems for impact, but then also steals data before actually encrypting all the systems. So that data theft is what is being used for leverage to get the victim to pay the ransom. And what will often happen is the company that's been ransomed does not know exactly what data has been stolen. And very often, and I ask this question during most events where I give a talk on ransomware, how many of you would be willing to negotiate with the threat actor? And there's very few people that ever raise their hands and say yes. But the problem is, because of this double extortion, you have to know what data they've taken. It's incumbent upon you to understand what data has been stolen from you, because you may have breach notification guidelines that you must comply with. CCPA, HIPAA, they all have breach notification regulations that you must comply with. So if you don't do the job of understanding what the threat actor's taken from you, you're sort of negligent as it relates to the stewardship of that data. So that's a key thing. And Justin, I know I cut you off there.
Right.
So.
No, it's a good point.
No, it's all right. Jodi does it all the time.
I do.
So thankfully, this won't air before Thursday because I'm working on a tabletop, and that's exactly what it is. But the other interesting point that I'd love to have you talk about with that is how often, if they've paid the ransomware, do they find out that the extraction of the data was not as widespread as they thought it was. And that's part of what the threat actor is counting on, because if you don't know and you don't pay it, it really puts you in a position where they're incentivizing you to pay.
Yeah. Well, so I think the first thing you've got to do if you're in a situation like that, if you find a ransom note on your laptop, for instance, or on a server, is call a guy like Justin, because you need counsel in a situation like that. You need outside counsel. It's really important. It's something I always say. It's not just to fluff you up there, Justin, but it's really important that outside counsel is engaged very quickly. Anyway, what you then do if you start negotiating with the threat actor and you're concerned about that data theft is you ask for what's called a proof of life, which is effectively going to be screenshots of folders or directories, or in some cases the actual files that have been taken. And a threat actor will be able to provide that with you or to you. And if they can't, like if they're saying, well, we've stolen a terabyte of data, but they're unwilling to show you what data they've stolen, I wouldn't trust them. I would think they're probably just using that as leverage and probably having to actually purloin the data that they purport to. So I would be looking for the proof of life, and then if you ultimately do pay the ransom, what I've seen happen is the threat actors, especially the more sophisticated ones, they do destroy the data, or at least don't leak it, because it's in their interest from a business perspective to do so. If they get the reputation of people pay and then they still have the data leaked, then people are going to be less likely to pay because the incentive is sort of diminished. And then additionally, they're sort of kind of defeating their own again interest of monetization by not doing that. What I have seen happen is less on the data theft side, but on the decryptor. So when you get a ransomware attack and it encrypts your systems, what the threat actor is going to do, if you pay, is provide you with what's called a decryptor. And those are generally pretty sloppy because they're not, sort of enterprise class software that's built to encrypt and decrypt, consistently. And so you often will wind up with corrupted files, even after having had paid the ransom. And the decryption process itself can be very cumbersome depending upon whether you get what's called a universal decryptor, which is basically one decryption key, which is going to work for all the systems that have been encrypted, or if it's unique to each individual system. So if you can imagine a situation where you've got, let's say 10,000 machines in your network and they all get encrypted, and I've seen that happen, and then you've got to have an individual encryption key for each individual system. Recovery from that, you might as well just start over. And we have guided customers to do that as well.
I'm thinking that we should have the sequel to that Russell Crowe, Meg Ryan movie, Proof of Life. I'm thinking screenplay, Paul. I'm seeing it.
Well, Paul, this has been a really fun conversation with Proof of Life screenplays and zero trust conversation and just overall good, practices that companies should be thinking about. And what we are asking everyone is if you can share, so since you do this all day, every day, you probably have some favorite personal cybersecurity tips or things that you do. So what would be a favorite personal cybersecurity tip that people could do?
So multi-factor authentication all day long. That's probably the most important thing anybody can do because your credentials are, just assume at some point they're going to be compromised. But if you have that second factor, you're doing a better job of protecting yourself. From a personal standpoint, whenever I'm on the internet, like even right now, I go through a personal VPN. So there are platforms out there which can encrypt every single bit of traffic that you ever engage with on the internet. And the platform that I use, I have on my laptops, my mobile devices, and it's consistent across all of them. So the user experience is pretty transparent. And I use that for everything. And since, at least in the old times, I traveled pretty much constantly. I did not want to use unsecured Wi-Fi in an airport or at a hotel without having some added level of protection. So that personal VPN is important for me. So I think those are really the two things that I would recommend everybody do is multi-factor and a personal VPN.
So do you have any particular brands or services that you use? We'd love to include them in the show notes so that people can go and grab them.
Sure, happy to. I have no personal relationship with any of these companies, but the VPN that I use is called Private Internet Access, or PIA. So it's a subscription. You pay an annual subscription. It's not terribly expensive and it works very well. For multi-factor authentication, so at Averdium we use Okta, which actually is a strategic partner of ours. And that's more for sort of corporate use. For personal use, generally your platforms that you interact with, whether it be your bank or Gmail, there's going to be a multi-factor option built into that, and you can just simply enable it.
Great. Well, thank you.
And I think, yes. And now we're going to divert completely from security. So Paul, what do you like to do when you're not in the office, not securing everyone's network for fun?
Let's see. I'm a musician, so I like to play guitar and piano. That's a nice way to relax a little bit. I like cooking. So last week was fun for me, being Thanksgiving. I did still, even though the crowd was rather small, I cooked a large meal. And then I think probably the other big hobby that I've always had is working on cars. So I've got some old cars that I take apart, put back together, and sort of in perpetuity, I'm working on some car someplace. So that's what keeps me busy outside of Averdium.
Well, my dad used to enjoy that when he was young. I personally don't get it. I go bring car to the car people. They do that, but I like the cooking one. Cooking is very relaxing and therapeutic. I like it.
Yeah, I agree. Nothing beats chopping an onion, right?
Chopping an onion is good. I like baking and mixing, and then you put it in the oven and poof, magic appears.
Baking, I'm not good at. And this is, I think, the difference between baking and cooking. One's an art and one's a science, right? Because baking, you got to get the recipe right. And I'm not a recipe guy, so.
Yeah, and see, I'm very methodical. I want my recipe and then I can follow it and poof, magic happens. The whole art thing, I got to know how to magically put it all together and hope it works. Yeah, I like my steps. Well, Paul, thank you so much. How can people stay in touch with you?
Well, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So if you want to maybe drop my my LinkedIn profile link, they can follow me there.
Yeah.
There's always some content that we're producing around cybersecurity threats and the nature of the risks that we're all facing. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Other than that, if you follow Averdium's website, I write a lot of the white papers and content there with the rest of my team. So there's always good resources there too.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much. And I think Paul and I are going to get to work on that screenplay. I've got big visions now. Cybersecurity can be cool.
There you go. Ransomware screenplay.
No, proof of life too.
Proof of life. There you go.
Yes. I think, who's Russell Crowe going to play, you or me?
I'm going me. He'll have to grow the beard out though.
Yeah, I got you.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah, Jodi, Justin, this has been great. Thanks very much. I was happy to do it, and I'm looking forward to doing it sometime again soon.
Indeed.
Awesome.